I want to thank President Tercero, Vice President Perez, and Vice President Sala for the invitation to be with all of you this evening. And I want to especially thank Richard Powers, the Executive Director of Gateway Cities COG, and to Diane Dubois for her work as the Metropolitan Transportation Committee Chair. So again, thank you very much for this invitation. And I apologize for not being there in person. It's great to see the kind of leadership being exhibited by the cities in the Gateway Council of Governments, because you recognize the value of transportation and what it can do to help alleviate some of the problems that we're having in regards to congestion. So we were putting together the beginnings of what came to be known as ICE-T, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act. So there are two elements in there that were really a big change from the past. The first was the word intermodal. That had never been really considered as part of what always was the highway bill. So now we were interjecting intermodal. And the other part of it, and it didn't make its way into the name of the bill, but it was an important part of the bill, and that was the formation of these metropolitan planning organizations. And remember, ICE-T was the first rewrite of the Interstate Defense Highway Act that President Eisenhower signed in 1956. So this is 1991 or 1990 when we were starting to put this together. And so as the principal author of ICE-T, we were trying to get all these ideas, again, trying to reflect a bottoms-up approach in terms of how decisions were being made, even with the funds coming from the federal level. And so we tried to marry the grassroots function of local government utilizing federal monetary mechanisms in order to leverage on what happened on an area-wide basis. And the other part of it is that I put in $1 billion for intelligent transportation systems. So we were trying to use technology to try to make things happen quicker and make things happen better. So you had the confluence of local agencies coming together through regional planning agencies, a funding source for new technology ideas. And we've got to make sure that as that new technology is being developed, that it also doesn't become a distracting aspect of driving, and that it adds to the safety of the operation. But this is where everyone has this opportunity to look ahead and try to weigh the pros and cons of each of the new technologies that are being considered, and like a menu, picking which ones you think will be to your advantage. There are going to be some that are going to be good for Norwalk, California, but it may not work in Buffalo, New York. And yet those local communities are the best ones to make that decision. It's hard to imagine that we'll be celebrating the 25th anniversary of ICE-T. So it wasn't too long after the MPO requirement was put into ICE-T that folks there in the gateway cities took the initiative to form your own COG to take advantage of the new planning and funding requirements under the COG and MPO process under ICE-T. So I want to congratulate all of your predecessors as well as all of you for putting all that hard work into making a regional plan and a regional operation come together. When I first was elected mayor San Jose in 1971, we had a population of 320,000. So we were, in effect, the smaller of the three cities of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. But that was when San Jose was making its transition from an agricultural community to high tech. So in 4 years, the population of San Jose soared to 580,000. We were always sort of on the outside. So it was important that there be some kind of mechanism for cities to be heard. I started a very aggressive campaign utilizing smaller communities, running from San Jose up to San Francisco on the west side of the bay, and from San Jose up to Oakland on the east side of the bay, and trying to rally those smaller communities about why we should be listened to. People in the Congress really don't know as much about that local situation as all of you do. And that's why I put that requirement of local officials operating through COGS to be able to express their hopes and wants and desires from a transportation perspective. One thing I found out is that, like a lot of things, if you're not at the table when subject matters are being discussed, you're going to be totally overlooked because someone else is going to be making decisions on your behalf. And so I found many occasions where, whether it was the Department of Transportation for the state of California, or UMTA, as it was called then, Urban Mass Transit Administration, and in fact, in the ICE-T bill, I changed the name to Federal Transit Administration. But there was always someone else who was making the decisions on your behalf. And I just felt that we really had to have our say on what was happening in our areas. I truly feel that people in local government, city council, members, mayors, boards of supervisors, have more knowledge about their own areas than others. So the whole idea of a COG in your area became very important. So I'm glad that all of you are working so hard at making it a reality for people in your region. I remember when I was announced as the Secretary of Transportation to be, and Rodney Slater, the former the Secretary of Transportation preceding me, called to congratulate me and said, "Norm, this job is going to be a snap for you because of your background and knowledge about transportation issues." Well, he hadn't anticipated the tragedy of a 9/11. And so on that day, you know, you can't go to a shelf and pull out a manual and say, now how do I handle this kind of a situation? I remember when the military assistant came into the vice president and said to him, there's a plane coming towards DC. And I was on the phone with our number 2 at FAA, Monty Belger, a professional air traffic controller starting at the bottom, and now he was number 2 at FAA. So I said, Monty, we've had 3 examples of where the airlines have been used as missiles today. And in the military, they have something called a stand down, where everything is brought to a screeching halt, and then you try to extricate yourself from the problem you have. So I said, we're going to have to do our own stand down. So let's bring all the planes down. Now we had at that point 4,638 planes in the air. And so when I told him to bring all the planes down, he, using air traffic jargon, said, we'll bring all the planes down per pilot discretion. And I said, Monty, screw pilot discretion, because I didn't want a pilot who was over, let's say, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and his destination was LA, for him to fly on into LA. I wanted all the airplanes down. So after the military assistant said there was a plane coming towards DC, I said to Monty, what do you have on radar on that plane? And Monty said, well, we've got a plane somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania, because it's hard to look at a radar set and try to pinpoint a point on the ground. So all he could say was somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania. So every so often I'd ask him, where's the plane now? Well, I think it's somewhere north of Baltimore. Where's the plane now? I think it's near Roslyn. Where is it now? It's Roslyn to Reagan National Airport. Where is it now? We just lost the bogey. We just lost the target. Where'd you lose it? Somewhere between Pentagon City and National Airport. And about that time, somebody broke into the phone line and said, Mr. Secretary, we just got a phone call from an Arlington County police officer who saw an American Airlines go into the Pentagon. So that whole time period, we were trying to figure out what are the movements of maybe any other plane. And so we were able to get some control of that by bringing all the planes down. Now the next day, the big issue as we were trying to put together the regimen of a new security system to allow the airlines to go back into the air. Because we brought them down Tuesday morning, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. By that time we had the new security regimen, and I said, okay, you can go back into the air. But the airlines weren't ready to do that. Very few flew on Saturday. Very few flew on Sunday, but most started their operations again on Monday to get back into the air. And of course, the biggest thing that was facing us initially was that of racial profiling. And as an 11-year-old kid, I was the subject of one of the largest racial profiling exhibits as a Japanese American when the federal government removed us from all of our homes in Washington, Oregon, California, and evacuated and interned us for the duration of World War II in these camps in the inner states like Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, Arkansas. And so the one thing I didn't want to see happen was any kind of racial profiling. So the number one item on that list of security regimens was no racial profiling, and had the support of President Bush as we enforced that, as we were coming up with a new system. It was one of those things at that point from 9/11 where it was not only a transportation issue, but it was also a national security issue. It was also one of trying to make sure that Middle Easterners or Muslims were not being targeted to be kept from flying. So we had a lot of people working on this, and it worked out very well at that point. You know, there's always been a lot of talk about devolution in terms of moving the program from the level to the federal level to the states. But when you do that, how do you deal with a state like Ohio, where you have everyone going through there? The state of Ohio isn't going to be able to come up with the necessary funding to take care of all the needs, because there are people from across the country, trucks and everybody else, traversing their state. So the funding level still really has to come from a federal level in order to equalize the effort by states to answer the problems. The problem is that the gasoline tax has been at 18.4 cents since 1993. And so even with vehicle miles traveled increasing, because of the fuel efficiency of the cars, there's actually less money, as all of you know, going into the Highway Trust Fund. And so in 2005, we had a $20 billion infusion of general tax revenues into the Highway Trust Fund. And then last year, there was another, I believe it was 31 billion infusion into the Highway Trust Fund. So we can't, although the states are going to have to be much more active in terms of planning, given the bottoms up from the MPOs and local communities, the states are going to have to be playing a more active role in not only the planning, but also in terms of the contracts that are issued, even using federal money. And this is really an opportune time with gasoline being under $50 a barrel to deal with that gasoline tax increase. And the other thing I think that all of us are going to have to keep in mind as I look at the economics of what's happening and the demographics of our population, I believe it's by 2025 that 75% of our population will be within 100 miles of the coastline and the borders of our states. And so people are moving. And so we're going to have to make sure that the states are going to be able to respond to that. And but the states aren't going to be able to respond to that totally on their own. And that's why it's really necessary that the federal government be looking at vehicle miles, tax schemes, increased public-private partnerships, and other mechanisms. How to use pension funds in order to leverage on financing of infrastructure projects. We have the ability to use technology, whether it's in the computer field, the IT field, or whether it's intelligent transportation systems, new mechanisms, financing, and all of you are going to be at the table as you're discussing these new facets of transportation. And the other element that I think we've got to keep in mind is to make sure that we still have the ability to move the people at the lower end of the economic stream to be able to get to their jobs. So this will be an added requirement or a need that people are going to have to look after. Again, I want to thank all of you for the work you've been doing and the work that you will be doing in the future to make sure that transportation does not become the problem, but that transportation can become a real solution to a lot of our social problems. Thanks a million.